All right, welcome. In this video, we're going to start to talk about private member variables and private and public member functions and accessor and mutator functions. So when you create your class, you want to make your class available. You want to make your class as versatile as possible and make it available for people to use. So what you really want to do is you want to hide how it works and just allow others to use their class in the way that they would like to use it, and you give them an interface on how to use it, but you hide the actual implementation and you don't allow other programs or other outside functions to access your private data. You want to keep as much data private as possible. So what you use are accessor and mutator functions in order to get to your private data. So let's first just take a look at this. This is the class day of year. So this is a class that has two pieces of data in it, and they're both private. It has a month and it has a day. And those are private member variables. So if I were to try to declare, say I would try to declare day of year today, and I'm in my main function. So this has been defined. This day of year class has been defined. I declare day of year today, and then I want to go today dot month equals 4. I would not be allowed to do that because I'm the main function and the month is a private member variable. So there's a couple of things that happened here. The first thing I want to review is that when I declare day of year today, right away my default constructor gets called, and whatever I have set the month and the year to be, the month and the year will be set by the default constructor. The other way I can do it is I can say day of year birthday, and I can pass it for 10. And when I do that, I'm declaring an object of type day of the year called birthday, but it's not going to call the default constructor, it's going to call the explicit value constructor. Another way I could do it is I could declare an object of type day of the year, and then say, let's get rid of this because I'm not allowed to do that. I could say today dot input, and that is a public member function. So anything that's public is available to me. And so I could do today dot input, and that would call the input function, and hopefully I have implemented the input function to interact and get the day, month and the day from the user. All right, so we've already went over the constructors and the input and the output function. What we have not gone over yet are these functions right here. So these functions are, this is what's called a mutator function, and these two functions are called accessor functions. So what do they do? Well, the accessor functions just return the private data. So because I'm not allowed to actually say today.month or bday.month, I would have to call this function, and this function would actually give me what month and day it is. And this other private member function is just an added feature to make sure that if I try to set the date, if I try to use this mutator function to set the date, I actually put in a valid date. So let's take a look at that. So let's erase this so you can see it. So this was the other before I made the changes. So if you haven't watched the previous video, this was from the previous video, the very simple day of the year class, and this is the new day of the year class with all of the new features. And let's see what's next. All right, so here is my main function. We're reviewing what we did in the last video. So this is my very simple class, which has a default constructor and an explicit value constructor. So let's review again one more time what the explicit value constructor does. I could declare day of year, birthday, and pass it two values. Today and birthday would call the default constructor. This bday right here would call the explicit value constructor. I can use the input and the output functions. This is the default constructor. This is the explicit value constructor. This is the input function, and this is the output function. This is our new class. So our new class has these new features. These are our two accessor functions. So our two accessor functions are going to provide access to the month and the day. So all you have to do is, once you declare, like, oh, that's not a good color. If I declare day of year, bday, and I pass it a 4 and a 10, then month is going to have the value 4, and day is going to have the value 10 because I called my explicit value constructor. But if I wanted to say, if I wanted to see out bday dot month, this would not be allowed because, and this is assuming I'm in my main function, or I'm in a different some program that's using my class. So I declare an object of type day of year, and then I want to print the month onto the screen. I'm not going to be able to do that because month is a private member variable. So what I would have to do is I would have to use a accessor function, and I could see out bday dot get month. The get month function would then access the private data, and then it would pass it back to me, and then I would be able to access that private data. So that's how accessor functions work. They have this keyword const here. It's not required, but it is a reminder that the accessor functions are not going to modify anything within the class. They're just going to access the private member variables and allow any program or any function that is using an object of my class to access the private data. All right, so here is an example of mutator functions. So we have the two accessor functions which get the day and the month, and then we have a mutator function. A mutator function allows you to set the day or the month. So the difference between using an explicit value constructor, in which you say day of year and pass it 4 and 10, that would call the explicit value constructor. But what if I said day of year day? So the first one right here is going to call the explicit value constructor because I've passed it values. The second instance right here is not. This one's going to call the default constructor, and if you remember, the default constructor sets the day to 0, 0. Then later in my program, if I wanted to set the day, I could use this mutator function. The mutator function is not called when you declare an object of your class. The constructor is called. The mutator function, you have to actually make that function call yourself. So I could call it with bday dot set and pass it, oops, I made a mistake. The birthday is not 410, it's 510. So it's going to mutate what bday was before and change it now to 510. Or I could say day dot set 620. This is day right here. And that would call the mutator function called set, and that would set the month and the day to June 20th. This one would set it to May 10th. You would only call the mutator function set with an object of your class that has already been declared. Remember, when you declare it, it will automatically call a constructor. If you do not have an explicit value constructor created, you cannot use an explicit value constructor. So you cannot pass values without having an explicit value constructor created. All right, so this one more function here is called check date. So this is just a private member function that checks to make sure if I call the set function is then going to just make a quick call to this check date, and it's just going to check to make sure that the month and the day are not illegal, that I didn't try to put in here 50 and 1,000, which is not a legal date. And if it is a legal date, it's going to end my program. So this is just an added feature that is not required, but it's just as a demonstration that you can add private member functions as well. If you notice, the private member function call does not use the dot operator because it is being called from a member function. So set is a member function. When set calls check date, it does not use the dot operator because you're already inside of your class calling one function from another. All right, so here is just some review. When I declare today and birthday, it's going to call my default constructor. Then here I call my input function. So this is one way to get information into today and birthday, because my default constructor doesn't really set it to any valid date that's useful for me. So then I can get input from the user by calling the input function. Then if I wanted to check to make sure, if I wanted to check to see if the day today that was input by the user matches the birthday that was input by the user, in order to access the private member variables, I would have to use the accessor functions. So I could access the month of today and the month of birthday and the day of today and the day of birthday to check to see if they match. But I could not go if today.month equals birthday.month, because month is a private member variable, so I need to use accessor functions to access that private data. So this is my accessor function get month, and this is my accessor function get day. And here's another way that I can initialize values in my class. I can initialize values in my class by using a explicit value constructor. My explicit value constructor takes 2 arguments, has 2 formal parameters, and it sets the month and the day based on the parameters, the numbers that are given to it. But I still, this example right here is outside of my class, so it's like in my main function testing this. All right, so here's using the set function. The set function is not used at declaration. If you notice here, I declare the day of year first, and then I use the mutator function called set to set a date, and then I have to use accessor functions to check to see if it is the same month as Christmas. So here is again my mutator function. My mutator function is used to change a date. It's used to change the date of an object that has already been declared. It's just a quick overview of this other example, which is a bank account. The bank account has 3 member variables that are all private. It has 2 constructors, a default constructor and an explicit value constructor. It has 2 mutator functions. The first mutator function has you enter the dollars and the cents so that you can set your balance to be with dollars and cents. The other mutator function just has you enter the dollars and the rate. It has a update function, which is going to calculate interest, and it has two accessor functions. So let's just remember what these are. These two right here are called accessor functions because they allow you to access the data that's in the private member variables. These two right here are called mutator functions, and this example is just here to demonstrate what an overloaded function is. So if you notice, these two mutator functions have the same name set, but they're called overloaded mutator functions because if you call the mutator function set and pass it 2 arguments, then you would call this set. And if you pass it 3 arguments, then you would call this set. So that's an overloaded function. So this is an example of overloading functions. So let's just take a quick look at using this a little bit. So first we have here our 2 accounts. So we're declaring 3 accounts here. The first 2 accounts, account 1 will be initialized with the default constructor. Account 2 will be initialized with the default constructor. And account 3 will be initialized with the explicit value constructor. Then we have, this is our default constructor, if you remember. And this is our explicit value constructor, so you can see the difference. If we initialize our account 1 and account 2, will be initialized with no money and no interest rate. And account 3 will be initialized with $100 and a 4.0 interest rate, 4% interest rate. So then this is the set function. So the first one of this, there are 2 set functions. This set function takes, whoops, messed up. So this set function down here, this set function right here goes with this mutator function. You pass it 3 arguments, 123, 99, and 3.0, $123.99, and a rate of 3.0. This set function right here is an overloaded function. So if I call the mutator function set with 3 arguments, it's going to call this one. If I call it with 2, it's going to call this one. So this would be with $100 and a rate of 5.0. So this is just showing you how an overloaded mutator function can work.